Dr. Taylor Burrowes, welcome to the 21 Day Love and Abundance Challenge. It's so great to have you. This is one of my favorite days because it's such a challenge for many people is their interpersonal relationships. And one of the things that challenges us the most is how we integrate ourselves into those relationships and actually find the people that really resonate with the type of relationship that we want to have. Now, you classify yourself as the vetting expert, and I would love to know a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm excited
Absolutely.
to be here with you and your community. I think the best way to introduce myself is probably a little bit more on the personal and just a little bit of the professional. I have my PhD in marriage, couples, and family counseling. I was licensed as a mental health counselor and a marriage and family therapist for 16 years. Then I decided to leave all that behind and throw caution to the wind and go full on into an online business as a coach. And so the reason I did that was because I was about 36, 37 at the time and unhappy. I was divorced and I was married for 3 years. And I realized I married the wrong man as a marriage therapist. And it was a rude awakening for me. Like, how could I get this wrong? But I realized that all the book smarts did not relate to real world success in relationships and marriage. And so I did a deep dive on myself. And that was a tough couple of years. But this was birthed, my new chapter in life, just rediscovering who I was because a lot changed. A whole lot changed. I was a liberal before, now I'm a conservative, and I just remarried my boyfriend of 5 years. So we have a baby now. I'm 45 years old and I have a 9-month-old baby. And we got pregnant naturally, or I got pregnant naturally. We conceived. And yeah,
Helps.
yeah, he helped a lot, but it was a long road. And I think I give a lot of hope to men and women that they can have a later in life love, marriage, even family. It's possible. It's not always possible, but it can be. And so I do help, I help people along their path to inspire them that it's not all, it's not as dire as sometimes we think it is. And that as long as you commit to those types of decisions and make the decisions based on your truth, I think that's what matters. Because yeah, oftentimes you don't have the map. When I was in that phase of my life, like I didn't have the answers. It took a lot of faith and a lot of determination to do what I did. And a lot of the people that I work with have the same crossroads to face. So yeah, I think the professional is one aspect, but I think that personal journey of mine brings a lot of credibility to what I do.
Oh, I believe that it absolutely does. And I don't want to leave there just yet. I'm curious about all the different pivots that you had to make over that several year period to include actually accepting or understanding or recognizing or acknowledging that the relationship that you were in was one that you were ready to leave or prepared to leave. Maybe not prepared, but ready for. So what did that decision making actually look like?
Oh gosh, there was a lot of tumultuous events and emotions, and I didn't want to leave impulsively, abruptly. I was responsible enough to know that and ethical enough to know I didn't want to just throw it out the window without trying. So what startled me was, especially as a mental health professional, I realized, and I won't go too deep into it, but I will just say that I realized shortly after we married, like 3 months into the marriage, that there was an illness there that had been lying dormant. And that's part of the reason why I encourage people to wait and vet for 2 solid, proactive years, not being passive, not just letting time go by, but actually consciously and mindfully vetting them because mental illness can be it's not intentional of the other person, but it can lie dormant. It can be very ambiguous and not really show up for about 2 years. And so that's what happened in my case, and I've heard from other people that happened to them too, and very wise, knowledgeable people that knew a lot about psychology as well. So in my case, once I started seeing the signs, I was alerted. I was definitely on alert and concerned, and then some severe events happened that included like a near death experience, police. It just got really bad. And I stayed until he was stable. And then I just looked down the barrel of life and I was like, there's no way I'm bringing children into this life. I don't respect this person. We don't share the same values. I'm afraid every single day of what's going to happen. What do I not know that's going on behind closed doors? And so I decided, okay, it's time to go and it's time to regroup and figure out how to restart my life from scratch. And I literally left with nothing. I had no checking account. I had no vehicle. I had no place to go. And yeah, I started from scratch. And then I started a business with nothing, with zero money, and slowly but surely made my way to just where I am now.
You touched on a really important point there, and that is to ask yourself, did I do all that I could in this situation, in this scenario? And that's really a sign of just really healthy self-awareness, but also acknowledging that you don't want to leave something unfinished. And a lot of times that's what we do. We don't give it the chance that maybe it deserves, or acknowledge that maybe there's some more work that we can do here, not even just for you guys as a couple, but individually for yourself. And one of the
Mhm.
things that I notice with a lot of the therapists that I speak with is they're very hard on themselves, and it's difficult to have all this knowledge and this experience and to live in it, and see all these things with other people, and you have this innate ability to be able to, like, you get so good at it that you can see everything from a mile away with other people. But then when it's our own stuff and we're in it and we're living in it, it can be really hard to see, and you take that as a negative against yourself. I should have known better. I should have been able to see this. What is wrong with me? And there's nothing wrong with you. You're actually human, and that's how humans act and react.
Yeah, I think what I realized though in doing that inventory and a post-mortem after that, I realized I just really wasn't happy and why, and that I wasn't being myself. I was being this projection of who I thought I should be, just like this overachiever that was successful in all these different arenas, but it wasn't me. And I wanted something different, and I had to figure out what that was.
Yeah, another element that you mentioned in there was respect. How
Mm.
important is respect to have in our relationships, not just for yourself, but for the person that you're with?
Yeah, it's very important. If you don't feel it's a voluntary surrender in the relationship,
Yes.
then it's going to be forced and inauthentic, and that's not going to work. You're going to be performing in a relationship, going through the motions of what you think you should be doing. And that's empty. It's just a shallow shell of a connection or a relationship. So having that respect really builds, it's a building block to all of those things that are fundamental.
Yeah, a lot of questions pop up around that, especially when we're in a scarcity mindset in terms of relationships. And we ask ourselves, but what if this is the best I can do? And I always tell people, be careful with that question, because what you're realizing is you actually don't like this person. What are
Mhm.
your thoughts on that?
I do think people tend to settle a lot in
Mhm.
relationships because they're afraid, they're avoiding being alone, you know? And I can relate to that in that experience. A lot of people who would be 36 or 37 and were married to someone who loved them, but was a very flawed individual and that didn't align with things. There was not compatibility. Like starting over at 37 is not easy, right? So a lot of people, I'm not trying to compliment myself a little bit, but just saying that it's not easy to do that. It's not easy to face being alone and single and starting over at that age. And a lot of people will choose to stay in unsatisfactory situations and settle just to have the family that they want or the marriage that they think they're supposed to have at that age.
Yeah, it's interesting. We do all that supposed to have. We're supposed to be here. This is where I'm supposed to be. And then we get upset because reality doesn't live up to our expectations. But even for myself, I didn't go back to school until 2011. So I was in my early 30s and I graduated with my bachelor's degree at 35.
Yeah, and I hope that more women take that outlook. And
Yeah.
when I talk to women about how to achieve it all, it's about timing. You can't do it all at once. And I really encourage women to focus on having children, obviously with the right person first, and then having those first formidable years with your children at home as much as possible. You can work from home, you can have a part-time job. So there are ways to work still, but ideally committing to higher education and a career might be better suited to later on, like in your mid to late 30s, 40s, and beyond. And there's nothing wrong with that. We need to have a society and a culture that really supports that and doesn't make women feel like they're irrelevant if they've been a housewife or a stay at home mom or whatever for so many years. They've been out of the workforce. I really think that companies need to encourage that and help find a pathway for women to do that, to re-enter the workforce after raising children, at least for 5 years or something.
Yeah, I think overall as a society, we need to reframe our view of age. I had somebody recently who's in their early 60s and they're just like, I just don't I don't think I have it in me to start a business or create anything new or do something different. And it's okay, but you're in really good health. Yeah. So what are you going to do if you make it to 95? Are you saying that everything stops right now, that you're tired and you're just not going to continue on to create anything new or tap into the things that you're capable of doing? That's not good. So you really have to think about, and we always tell ourselves, right, after 40 or 50, oh, it's all downhill. And on your 50th birthday, you get the black birthday card, right? It's just, you almost have 50 more years. If you're in good health, right, you potentially have another 50 years with medical technology and everything else that exists today and will exist in the future to live your life. And so, what are you going to do with the time that you have and get really excited about living your life and to learn and grow and expand and develop and create?
Yeah, there is a lot of ageism in that sense. And when it comes to relationships, work, and a lot of things, just, yeah,
Yeah.
change, growth. Yeah, exactly. You can, at any point in time, any day in your life, do something different and explore something new. Like there is no shelf life on that.
Yeah. Now, a big part of this challenge is all about love and abundance. And I often say that the work always starts with you. Before we can have an abundant, connected relationship, they need to embody self worth. What are the biggest self love mistakes people make that keep them in scarcity, both in dating and in life?
I agree with you. And a lot of the work that I do is on an individual person and not necessarily when they're selecting their options. People think vetting is just when you're trying to choose between people or in a relationship in the early days, but vetting includes vetting yourself. And that's this period of time where you're single and you're not quite clear on who you are, what you need, what you want, what's important to you, what your values are. And so that lack of self awareness, I think, comes before even that self love. It's that knowledge of that clarity that comes with that. You have to know yourself. You have to keep yourself in good company first in order to learn to love who you are. So, lack of self awareness and then fear, like facing all those insecurities, whether it's missing your chance on love or on family or not being enough, being too flawed, having a checkered past of sorts. So a lot of that it comes into the picture too, where you're already handicapping yourself because you're denigrating what's possible for you. Right. So you need to face those fears. And that's also where surrender comes in as well, because yeah, like it's possible that you could be single for the rest of your life. It's possible that you might not ever have biological children. Now what? Like, what are you going to do about that? Like, so you have to confront those fears in order to overcome them. And a lot of people are reactive because of those fears, because they want to avoid feeling the fear. So they'll settle. Right. That's what happens. That's the cope. The defense mechanism is that you'll settle in order to get what you think you want, but not in the right way. So fear, lack of self-awareness, and then also that lack of emotional maturity and self like regulation, like not being able to regulate the emotions and being stuck in that emotional reactivity. So that's also what gets in the way of self-love, right? If you're stuck in your wounds and triggers and you're not able to look at them, understand them. So self-understanding, I think that's sometimes missed when I say self-awareness, but really understanding not only who you are and where you want to go and what you want out of life, but where you've been and how that impacted you. So those are the things. Those would the three biggest areas I focus on.
Let's stay on that part of where you've been. I had
Mhm.
somebody hit me up on Facebook yesterday because of a post that I made, and they were saying it basically came down to, oh, you think everybody deserves love? And it's reflecting back on past experiences and who you've been at different stages of your life. And the thing is, people grow, they do change, they do evolve if they make that conscious choice, if they have enough self awareness to make the determination for themselves that, you know what, where I'm going right now, probably unhelpful. I need to do some things that are going to help me create a better life for myself. So, what do you tell somebody that has that checkered past and has that overwhelming feeling or emotion of not enoughness?
I do think sometimes they may have some unrealistic expectations. And so looking at those as well, because you do need to accept and acknowledge that certain things may not be in your future. You might have to rule out some options because of that. But now, how are you going to make those adjustments that are necessary? How can you embrace what you've been through, the path that you've had to walk to get here, and recognize that there's going to be people out there that accept you and love you for who you are. And it's really only healthy people. The unhealthy ones are not going to see you as someone who's healed and grown and learned from all of those experiences. So the healthy people will recognize that and they'll accept that. So you don't have to worry about the other people. Like you don't need to connect to everybody in the world, only the ones that align with you. And so it does help clarify your job a little bit. You can rule out people that don't get it, that don't get you. They don't, maybe they have some kind of sheltered experience earlier on in their life, and they just might not be your people.
That's so interesting. So the unhealthy people can't see the work that you've done. And if they
Mhm.
do, they'll reject you because of the way that it makes them feel about themselves.
Yeah, that's a great way of saying it.
That's so interesting. Because think about how many different people that you have in your own life where you've had these relationships with them and they've changed for whatever reason. And at the end of the day, it's because you've changed. You're different. And when you become different, when you change, when you grow, develop, and evolve, the world has to respond to you, right? Because you're putting out all these different outputs into the world. And so it's going to come back to you in a way that maybe is unexpected and not quite the way that you wanted it. You might have
Mhm.
this expectation of these other things happening and that, oh, I'll change and then people will like me more. No, you changed and now they're rejecting you. And that can be difficult to manage and to understand. So, how can we help people understand that your growth is important and it's healthy and it's a positive thing? But when you get hit with that rejection, how can you begin to navigate that with other people?
It comes up a lot in the work that I do, and you hear the rejection is really redirection,
Yes.
but I like to say
It sounds nice. It makes us feel good, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like it, but what I think is more even more specific is that it's clarification. When you're really you wanna honor their truth, right? If you find out that someone does not like you or doesn't accept you or doesn't understand you, then that's just information for you to use going forward, right? It makes your job easier. So you're gathering all this information, observations, conversation, behavior, you're observing all of this, and you get to use that to inform yourself on where to go next. So if you didn't have that rejection, quote unquote, from that person, then if you have more ambiguity, it's a lot harder to make decisions, right? So I see the rejection as just clarification. And that's what you want when you're vetting anything, not just people to date. Finding out what doesn't work is so helpful in getting closer to what does.
Another part of this is letting go of good so you can have great.
Mm,
Recognizing that a relationship may not be for you necessarily, and they can be a great person. They can be a kind person. They could be somebody that maybe you have some internal conflict towards because I should like this. I should want to be in this relationship. And then we start shooting ourselves a little bit. What would you tell somebody that's going through that internal conflict?
oh gosh. I think when people are in that headspace, there's something intangible that's missing. And so they're trying to force it because a lot of times people might line up. in their values. So they think they're compatible. But just because someone checks all those boxes, so to speak, does not mean they're the right good person for you. So you're not just looking for a good person or a good enough person, you're looking for a right fit. So the bare minimum is finally clarifying who is a good and healthy person. A lot of people are stuck in just picking unhealthy, not so good people. So that's a first step, definitely getting to that bare minimum where you're selecting good and healthy people. But then the next step is finding the right good and healthy person for you.
Yeah, for some people, that's their superpower. They have this wonderful capability of finding all the wrong people, right? They'll say that I only ever date narcissists, I only ever date avoidance. And it's, again, that's information that you can use about yourself to determine how do I vet the relationships that I'm going to get into. If somebody's having that experience where they're having these repeated patterns or exposures to certain types of relationships, how can they begin to practice a better vetting practice for finding the relationship that's right for them?
I was actually just speaking to a friend, a lady who's very aware of attachment and stuff.
Probably too aware. That's often the problem as well.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
she's caught in this cycle of dating, vetting, anxious oh, no, sorry, avoidant men, and so she's more of an anxious attacher, and the last big breakup was not too long ago, last year, and she did a whole sort of pause on relationships, and she went and traveled and tried to have some self-discovery time and came back refreshed. But then there was just recently a new person that in the early stages started to show signs of avoidant attachment behavior. And it wasn't to the extreme, right, of what she'd experienced before. But when I was talking to her the other day, I pointed that out. I'm like, you're catching this so much earlier now that you're not getting to invest in the relationship where it's going to be so hard on you to pull out. This is still very early on, very fresh, and there's no emotional investment. So the fact that you're seeing it and you are capable of communicating your needs
It's huge.
and your boundaries and what you value, all of that stuff to him now and prepared to hear the that's too much for me, that is a huge win. So
Yeah.
it's okay that it's not going to work out. It's the improvement that you're demonstrating, that you're catching it earlier and capable of doing the things that you need to do. And probably the next relationship will work out. That's usually what happens.
Yeah, it's like that meme with Leonardo DiCaprio where he's, "Hey, hey, hey, right there, look at that." And they catch it and they see it ahead of time, and it's such a really good feeling and empowering because now you feel capable, competent, and confident in who you are as a person and how you're showing up in the early stages of these relationships where you're asking more, do I like them instead of do they like me? And then you're less trying to please the situation as opposed to just being more of an observer and being interactive and being curious about the other person and trying to figure out, well, who are they really? And then allowing the space for these things to unfold just a little bit more naturally.
And just to be more specific, because I don't know if for the participants, but I find examples really helpful. So
Hmm.
to get more specific in this case, the specific behaviors that were happening, I totally get. And it happens a lot for women, especially that they will accept this bare minimum and they will tolerate men not courting them. And I
Hmm.
don't mean it in a cliche 1950s, 60s kind of way, but just basic decency of treating a woman, full grown adult woman who's 40 odd years old, and he's older than that, and asking her out on a proper date and treating her like she's special. This is something intentional. And instead just accepting the, oh, let's go hang out, come over, we'll make food scenario. And that sounds almost juvenile, right? Like
Hmm.
the friends with benefits and Netflix and chill thing. But a lot of older men do that too. And they may not even be conscious of it, but that doesn't matter. Like it still makes it bad. You don't want to mold these people like they're grown men. They need to know how to do this and communicate what you need. But if they react badly, then just walk away. But it's important for a woman, especially in that age bracket, because I don't want to say desperate, but she's at that verge of giving up. She's got this sense of urgency that it's actually quite common to settle for that. And then you end up settling always in that relationship. So if you don't pivot in the beginning And maybe he changes and maybe he'll rise to the occasion, but likely he won't. And she's at least avoided that fate, right? So I think it's just so important for women who are pleasant and agreeable and feminine and nurturing and don't want to ruffle feathers to speak up and say no. I don't want to just hang out and have food at your house. I want to be courted. And I think that's an important permission for women to give themselves, especially because I see a lot of women here today.
Yeah. So here's another interesting thing that popped up this week someplace else. So I have this person that got asked out on a date a week ago, committed to a date this Saturday, right? There's no plan, nothing's in place, there's no reservation for anything. The expectation now is like up in the air. Are we going out? Is anything happening? It's now Thursday. There's been no text message to confirm or to really settle the plans for Saturday. What do you tell that person? Because do they send a text message and ask, hey, I'm trying to plan my weekend. What do we have going on Saturday? What's happening? How would you phrase that? Or do you even contact them? Or do you just assume, I'm not going on that date?
I would probably suggest that the person, if they're really itching to communicate, it's okay to communicate, but maybe finesse it a little bit. And it's not about being manipulative, but you want to do it in a way that you're going to have a positive outcome, right? You don't want to point a finger and scold someone. You don't want to demand
Hey,
things and
looking
tell them what
forward
to
to
do.
Saturday.
Or even it could be something like, since I haven't heard from you, I'm just to let you know, I am making plans for Saturdays or whatever. I'm not going to be available this weekend. Maybe we can do something again next weekend. Or if you don't feel like that you want to hang out with them again, then maybe it can even be, yeah, a little bit more of a boundary of a solid boundary of no more communication. That was your one chance kind of thing, but
Mhm.
said it in a way that's a bit more tactful, obviously. But I think sometimes people hold back on communication and because they're afraid of looking needy. And I don't think that's a good enough reason to avoid communication. A lot of times it's just how you communicate that makes the difference. Working on that, I think a lot of people have a hard time with how to communicate, especially via text. And I wouldn't encourage anyone, in fact, I discourage people from having any kind of serious conversation in text form. You want to
Mhm.
get on the phone or in person, but obviously, if you're talking about meeting up, then on the phone at least have the conversation. And if they don't pick up the phone, if they don't call you back, then that's enough information, right? Like then this is like a non-starter situation. But if they are responsive to what you communicate and do feel badly and want to reassure you, that's a good sign. That's enough of a positive response that you can work with that. You can go forward with that. But maybe it's, they're busy and they're juggling a few things and they're not quite sure when this is going to happen. So they want to be like definitive when they talk to you, but maybe you can say, it's okay if you're not sure about something yet, but I really just want to have more clarity by this point in the week of what I'm doing with my weekend. So it's more about you communicating your boundaries.
Yeah, I love that you're touching on communication because that's always such a big piece, especially with our relationship to technology today. A lot of younger people are very connected to their phones, and it is their primary mode of communication in most circumstances. And so, at what point do you start to communicate your needs in terms of the level of text messaging or calls or the style or type of communication that you desire? How soon would you ask for that or have that conversation?
Oh, right away. I think you start off just being quite transparent about those things. If you have certain preferences that are meaningful preferences, they're boundaries. If you don't like to be contacted after a certain hour or before a certain hour, you
Yeah.
want to say that pretty early on. I think a lot of people are afraid of coming across, I guess, I don't know if clinical is the right word,
Overbearing.
but like just too particular. You know yourself so well that you have these things, this information about yourself, but they're afraid if they communicate that early on, people are not going to find them fun or
Right.
carefree or something, that it's going to put people off and it will put the right people off or the wrong people off depending on how you look at it. You, as long as you know that you're not being unreasonable and these are things that you need, it's okay to talk about it right off the bat. It's just about how you talk about it. So making sure that you are working on your communication skills so that you can say things more gracefully and tactfully
Right.
and coming across as creating space for conversation and curiosity versus trying to shut things down and point fingers and tell people what to do or not to do. Because a lot of times people do the same thing with boundaries in general. They
Right.
think boundaries are controlling other people's behavior, but no, it's about your behavior.
Yeah.
So you want to frame it in that way from a first person perspective, not telling people what they're doing wrong or what they need to change. It's all about you and what you need.
Yeah. A lot of people, I hear this over and over again. These are my demands. This is the contract that I want to make right now with you in this moment. And it's first date, second date. These are my deal breakers, and this is how it is. And that's how it comes across. And the other person's just sitting there. I thought we were just gonna have dinner. Like, what's happening, right? And
Yeah.
it does. It can feel like it's too much. And in turn, that makes you feel like you're too much because you're putting these demands out there. So that tactfulness, I think, is really important. Also,
Mhm.
the timing of it
Mm.
all. Read the room, have the conversations. A lot of these things you can slip in to conversation very subtly, and the other person will be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. At the end of the day, your intent is to, I want this person to be successful in this relationship with me, but at the
Yeah.
same time, I don't want to go off the deep end. And I know that these 5 things certainly make me go off the deep end. I need somebody that is going to be attentive to those things, recognizing it's my work and these are the things that I have to do personally, but I need them to help me to create this successful and safe space for this relationship.
And you make me think about this aspect that I think is a good skill to have, especially as a woman, is when you're talking to a man, they want to be helpful.
Oh yeah.
They
Let
want
us
you to
be
be
useful,
vulnerable,
please.
but it helps them feel a value and masculine. And you don't have to put yourself in a position where you're at risk, but just asking for help is a vulnerability, right? So being able to say, this is something that I'm struggling with or that I'm thinking about, and what do you think would be a good way, a solution to this, basically. So you're asking for them to help you find a solution. And that's a way to phrase it where you're going to get their buy in. And if it relates to the context of your dating, then that's going to land for them a lot better than trying to tell them what to do or not to do. They'll check out. They'll be like, no.
Another area that you touched on was neediness.
Mhm.
Many people confuse emotional connection with dependency. How can someone differentiate between healthy interdependence and neediness in relationships?
I don't think that neediness is often the issue. A lot of
It might be
times,
how we express it, how we feel about ourselves. I feel like I'm being needy in this moment.
yeah, the goal is to be securely attached to yourself and to find that a securely attached
Yeah.
person out there so that you can build a reciprocal relationship, a healthy reciprocal relationship with someone you're compatible with, right? And so when you get those essential elements in place, there's really no concern about being in a codependent relationship. What happens though is that people often get into these trauma bonds where they're reacting off of each other, they're triggering each other, and they're stuck in this sort of idea of hot and cold roller coaster relationships. And that's what creates neediness, is being in that kind of scenario. But when you're in a healthy relationship, you need each other, but it's not in a toxic way. So as long as you're coming from that healthy foundation, secure attachment, then you're not going to be in a unilateral relationship where you're the giver and they're the taker. And that's the problem that I think relates to neediness, is that one person is really not doing their part. So making sure that you're creating a relationship with two givers. They might not have started as a giver, but because you're in such a great relationship and you're in a healthy attachment, that it becomes a relationship between two people who want to outgive each other in love and in service. And yeah, just finding ways to make the other person feel loved, appreciated, supported.
Now you hit on secure attachment. How being securely attached to yourself, and I know a lot of people are like, "What? How do I do that? What are the steps? What are the
Well,
steps
we've
to
talked about
earning
it.
secure attachment?"
I think it's another term to get familiar with, but just the basics are knowing what you value. Put it this way, our boundaries are made up of our boundaries are how we get our needs met. And these are all based on what you value. So your values are at like the bottom of this whole process. You need to like the groundwork needs to be laid with figuring out what you value, what those core values are. And once you figure that out, then you're going to determine what you need in the relationship and how you're going to get those needs met with boundaries. So that's the most important thing, is to clarify what is non-negotiable and what are our preferences, basically the negotiable things. And once you can determine those aspects for yourself, you have more clarity, you can go forward a lot more productively and constructively in the dating process.
One thing we didn't touch on, and I want to backtrack a little bit, was when you're in between relationships and going on a relationship fast. I
Mhm.
heard that I think it was Mark Groves in his book Liberated Love. I don't know if you've read that yet. Really good book, and I love the way he wrote it. It was through the lens of codependency as he was breaking down his own relationship struggles and things that he went through. But a part of it was going through a fast where, so many of us struggle in our relationships to begin with, and you might find yourself in that place where you're dating the avoidant or somebody, that same pattern over and over again, and you might need to break free from that. And one of the greatest ways to do that is to actually take the time away from dating. But the
Mhm.
question always becomes, how long is too long? Because it starts to feel good when you're away from it for a long time.
Very true. Yeah. And I actually just I focus on a relationship break. I have a new offer that's take a relationship break, and it's not realistic to do. Obviously, a week is not enough to have a true hiatus or a moratorium on dating. It takes sometimes a prolonged time, depending on how much work you have to do. But I go through the relationship readiness. I have a quiz for it, but I go through this process of assessing how we can identify what your weak spots are, and then we customize the plan on goals that we can set to help you progress in those areas. And in the meantime, while you're single, it's really important to be comfortable in your own company. And if you don't like yourself in your own company, that's when you're going to have that problem where you connect with people just as an avoidance of not wanting to be alone, and really utilizing the other healthy relationships in your life, your family, your friends, and colleagues. Whether or not they are secure, maybe they're an important relationship that you want to develop to be more secure, but really utilizing those relationships so you're not really alone, but you do want to really take a break off of the opposite sex romantically and focus on being single, friendly, and social. That's how I frame it for my clients. And just being, you know, outgoing and communicative, striking up conversations with everybody, not literally everybody, but strangers, like not having the intention of dating them, or even just having that specific boundary in mind is very helpful for women, especially. No, I'm not in a position where I want to be dating right now. I'm working on some things. And being able to say no when someone asks them out, I think it's very empowering for a lot of people. Men have a much harder time with this, but for women especially, I think it can be really helpful and clarifying for a woman to who knows that she's not in a place to pursue a relationship, to be able to say no. And there's that scarcity mindset that creeps in. What if it's like a chance that I'm never going to have again and I can't let it pass me by? And so, especially with men, that will come up, and having to talk through that with them in understanding that if it's really meant to be, then you will have another chance with this person if you deal with it appropriately. As long as you're not like being impulsive, pushing them away, and being weird, you can
Mm.
say something very intuitive that they will respect and appreciate. When the time is right, you can reconnect with that person. But the worst thing to do is to pursue a dating relationship with someone when you know you're not ready and when the timing is off. And then you're going to lose the opportunity with that person because it's not going to work out. And then that's it. So it
Right.
actually has a better chance of working out if you stop like before it starts and then regroup later on.
Absolutely. And it's attractive. When you have the ability to say no to something in the moment that you know for you isn't right, because for a variety of reasons, it can be work, personal, family, other relationships, other challenges that are going on in your life, but you recognize that you value this person and that experience, and you don't want to ruin it. So
Mhm.
by saying no in the moment, that other person, if it's meant for you, they're still going to think about you. They might reach
Mhm.
out every now and again, and especially on social media and stuff like that. So that connection will always be out there in the ether.
Yes.
And then there's always an opportunity. How many times has this happened to somebody where months down the road you get a text message and it's, hey, I would love to meet up, and you're just like, where did that come from? And it's just the energy starting to align for both of you, and now
Mhm.
that's a great opportunity to meet up because you're probably going to be in a better spot.
Totally. Yes. And
Hopefully.
you're right. The social media aspect is helpful. I use the term like you can stay on each other's radar without
Absolutely.
fishing too much, but just like appropriate rapport and banter and keeping it at that level. So it's not like anyone's chasing each other or disrespecting boundaries. So
Yeah, a
civility.
couple good comments here and there, a couple likes. Stay away from memeing them to death. Don't do that. Keep yourself on the radar if you want to be on the
Mhm.
radar.
Yes. And I remember with Dennis and I, with my husband, when we were vetting long distance, which
Oh,
was really,
that's right.
yeah, it was 9 months of long distance. Oh, and we wanted earlier when Jason and I were talking about today, I called him on Instagram and he was
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, I never talk on the Instagram
I'm
call
like, is this a
feature.
butt dial? What is this?
And I said that Dennis and we first connected on Twitter, but then moved to Instagram and he called me on the Instagram. That was like the only time I've ever used Instagram phone feature. But yeah, anyway, so we were vetting long distance using social media. We connected and then it escalated. And this is part of how I base my vetting system online and teach people how to use social media to vet and connect with a potential spouse. But it was really hard in the beginning and I remember because you have like all your insecurities and you ruminate about things, you obsess about things, and you want to make sure you know what they're doing and who they really are. Are they presenting themselves? And he had pushed the conversation a little too far for me at one point, and I did that. I said, here's a boundary for you. I don't feel comfortable with that. That's not what I want to do here. And it put the brakes on a little bit, and he's pulled back, which was good because that was respect. But then we stayed on each other's radar with a little bit of likes and comments here and there. And it wasn't until a month or two later that I think I called him one night and then we had a good conversation and then it started up again and it picked up steam and sometimes you need to do that. You can't be afraid of those interruptions because they may be necessary just to
Well,
clarify those kinds of boundaries.
yeah, no, I love it because your boundary caused him to pull away. And in that pull away, it gave you time to think a little bit more about him and the experience. And then it's, oh, I might send a message out to him. Right. And in his
Mhm.
mind, he might have been thinking, maybe this is over and having some negative thoughts about it. I'm curious, were you able to get that information from him of what he was thinking in that in that period right there?
Whenever I ask him questions about that, he was pretty easygoing about all of it. He just knew he liked me and we were in the same circle. So we were in each other's radar, which
Ah,
is why that is
okay.
also important.
Yeah.
But I think most of it just rolled off his shoulder. But he, like most men, didn't want to be cold rejected. You know what I mean? So I
Right.
think men will pull back if they feel that there's like a hard rejection around the corner, which that wasn't the case. We just had a little bit of friction. But if you can work through that, you want to have the courage to work through that. And I think a lot of times we will shy away from that confrontation, which is not always a bad thing because it can be a little scary. You get a little
Oh,
anxious
yeah.
when you're going to talk about the hard things, but it can also be really positive and bring you closer to the right people.
Now, since you went through a long distance relationship, What are some key components to that to help people be more successful in a long-term relationship? You're seeing it more and more just because, again, the access of having social
Mhm.
media available to you, and maybe you live in a rural area, so your demographic is quite small, and you see the same people on the dating apps over and over, and they've been on the dating apps for 5 or 10 years already. That's just their go-to, and you recognize the pattern there, and you're like, nope, that's not for me. So you expand your network, and now that gets expanded into the social media world, and you end up in a long distance relationship. How can we be successful with that?
You want to talk about your, goals around location and work and if you're flexible. And so there should be some kind of information about flexibility if there's someone who can travel or if they're not really locked into their location. That's early on, you should clarify that. And you can still chat as friends if there is no possibility logistically in sight. So it can be civil if it doesn't work out that way, but you really do have a nice connection, but just acknowledge you can't really pursue a romantic connection. But if there is some flexibility there, then don't rule it out because all going well, as long as one person is really open to the idea of changing where they live and they have a flexible job or whatever, then be optimistic. It happens all the time that people will take that leap and make it work across countries. I've had clients make it work from long distance that was very far. So communication is really important during that time. And if a man is unwilling to be communicative and gives you breadcrumbs, that's not going to work. So you have to have someone who's very responsive and not necessarily in an intense way, right? Consistency is not the same as intensity. So you want someone who is consistent and responsive to you, but doesn't need to like be on the phone with you every single day. But they are not going to leave you on red. They're not going to
Right.
disappear. They're not going to avoid answering your questions. And they're going to be taking the initiative to share things with you. That's really important. Like, for instance, with Dennis, he would share pictures and videos without me asking for them. Like, he was just very forthcoming with that because he was traveling all over the place. So I felt like I was there with him and I felt that was special that he was sharing that with me. Of course, in the back of my mind, I'm like, is he doing this with other women? Just one of a few. But I had to vet him longer to really figure out whether he was or
Yeah.
wasn't. And
Was he?
obviously, he was not.
Okay. Very good.
Yeah. And when you meet in person, that's going to solidify a lot of things. Because if
Yeah.
you're doing this long distance at first, you want to have a meeting time. Usually, about 3 months in is a good time to start talking about meeting up. And then once you meet up, then it should be pretty clear from that point if you're going to be making efforts going back and forth to visit. And if they're very blasé about that and non-specific, then that would be a concern that I would have. And I would hope that you would have a concern about that because you can't just leave that to chance. You got to be more organized and clear about
Yeah.
when you can see each other and how this is going to go from here on out. And so the couples that I have matched in my subscription, they have started visiting each other every month after that process. And that's what you're looking for, someone who is taking the initiative and communicating clearly and enthusiastic about you. You need to have enthusiasm. And they can't just be like, oh, just like your pen pals or something. No, there needs to be clear chemistry and enthusiasm from both of you.
Absolutely. So Connie has a question in the chat here. In terms of social media, when should you bring up the conversation about expectations or boundaries about communicating with others via social media, i.e., Snapchat, Facebook, dating, or dating websites? That's a good
My
one.
suggestion is it is a good question. Thank you,
Yeah.
Connie. My suggestion is to not have this conversation until you meet in person. Once you solidify that you are really taking this seriously. You can't do that before you meet in person. It's like the define the relationship moment. We never did that officially, but it was all theoretical until you meet in person and you confirm this is legit. You feel how you feel. It's the same as how you felt before. And if you are a healthy person, then you can trust your intuition. You've done your due diligence. Now it's really just about letting the relationship unfold. And you have to give a bit of trust in order to build that trust with each other in the relationship. So you want to give them good faith. If you can't give someone good faith, then there's problems there that need to be addressed. So I remember seeing things like on Dennis's social media, like he had a lot of those thirst trappy women on his follow list, and it definitely bothered me. But what I noticed is it's slowed down significantly to a stop, right? Like over time, I noticed that reduced drastically. And that reassured me that I never actually brought it up with him until we were officially together. And then I brought it up in humor, like to tell him about it. But I never directly asked him about it. I was just watching his behavior. So if I saw that happening, or if you saw that happening with someone that you were vetting, you should bring it up, right? If you felt disrespected, if you noticed he was interacting with these people, then I would bring it up and say, I'm feeling a bit anxious and uncertain because it seems like you are talking to a bunch of women, and I don't know if that's true. So I thought I would just bring that up and let you know that I'm having these feelings, and I would prefer don't say too much at once. This is one thing that I tell my clients is just start the conversation, especially in text. People have this habit of trying to say everything in one message. Just have a big, yeah, just have the beginning and invite the back and forth. So you can know where you want to go with it, but just start it and then see how he responds. And then have your follow up. And depending on how they respond, you get to a conclusion at the end of it.
No, that's really good. And in a similar vein, you can obviously coach your partner to some degree where when they do something that you do, you're focusing more on that instead of all the things that you don't like. So when they do something that you like, you just say, wow, thank you so much. Or I love when you do this thing. And that just like it sends off a little bell in their brain. Oh, they like when I do this thing. I should probably do more of that because the end result is something that I like or that I prefer. And then you both do that to each other. And it just like, over long periods of time, it brings it all together for you.
Here's a little, I don't know if the ladies are aware of this, but I can give you some inside scoops on men and how they approach this too. Is if a woman sends a selfie that she then posts on Instagram or whatever social media, they're like, it almost gives them the ick. Like men have icks too. And that would be something if you were in a vetting situation with someone where you were taking each other seriously to see if you wanted to pursue a relationship. If they saw that from you and they felt a way about it, I would advise them to say something to you. Yeah, I
They'd be
noticed
like,
that,
nope, she's for the streets.
yeah, exactly. It goes both ways, right?
Yeah.
If they notice something about you that they don't like, they can approach you. And if you notice something that really gives you the ick, then you should say something to them as well. But Jason said, make sure that you're also pointing out the positives and reinforcing the good behavior because that's more effective.
And also have a really good understanding of what your icks actually are. Sit with them for a little bit, tug on it, ask yourself where it's coming from. Where am I feeling it in the body? What is this bringing up for me? Why is this something that's popping up? Really tug on that string just to have some clarity on what it is that's happening in this moment, right? The way somebody walks and that gives you an ick. Really? Have you seen these TikToks where the girl or somebody will
Tell
say,
me.
This is an ick. And then it goes to a notes app and it's like number 500 and it's all the icks listed on the thing of this is just the next ick that this person
Mhm.
doesn't like. So don't do these things. Don't have a backpack. Don't walk down the street on the opposites of whatever. And so it's just interesting. These icks really come down to there's something going on inside of you that you need to ask yourself what's happening. And at the same time, you might not just like the person. I think that's another thing. We often sit there and say, oh, that's an ick. No, maybe you just don't like them. And that's okay. You don't have to force yourself to like somebody, but at least admit that to yourself instead of picking them apart for something that's just a natural part of who they are.
Or you're expecting perfection.
Yeah, maybe.
You don't tolerate like these things that are just no big deal. They're just, I don't know. I think flaws are beautiful when you really like
Yes,
someone. You learn to love them. And I think
absolutely.
that's really important too, is to recognize that nobody's going to be perfect and there's going to be things that happen in relationships that are awkward, and having the maturity to accept those things as inevitable trade-offs that we have in life.
But I encourage everybody, hop on TikTok and type in Icks, IICKS, and it'll pop right up and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. And it's hilarious and sad at the same time. Dr. Taylor Burrowes, thank you for being here today. Tell everybody how they can reach you, work with you, and find you on social media.
On Instagram and Twitter, it's at Taylor Burrows. So the spelling of my name, Jason will give you.
Oh yeah.
And then on TikTok and YouTube, it's at Dr. Taylor Burrows. I would love to do this relationship readiness quiz with you. So feel free to ask for a free vetting call, and I'll give you the link to the quiz, and that will put you on my list, my correspondence list, so I can follow up with you about potentially going a little bit further into a deep dive with that and the sort of conclusion of the results of what you got. And the link is bit.ly, if bit.ly links, bit.ly/RR quiz in all caps. Can't remember if it's case sensitive, but
Yeah.
you can take it there. And yeah, I think it's fun, and it doesn't take too long. But what I really like about the quiz is that it might be a really positive experience for you to realize, hey, like I'm not as bad as I thought I was.
Yes.
I'm not as unready and stuck as I thought I was. You might be a relationship master or a relationship apprentice. Those are the top two. And then it's relationship novice and relationship naive. So those are the worst ones. You don't want to be in that
Right.
category. But either way, there's always room for growth. But a lot
It's
of people are turning up in the first two categories. And so I think it's going to be actually a way for you to have some optimism infused into this process and realize that a lot of the times it's just about finding the right person for you. And there's not just one, but finding a right person for you in the right time. Timing is so important too. So
yeah.
keep doing what you're doing, and we can talk about more specifics if you want to.
All right, guys. Thank you for another amazing day. This is day 6. See you guys tomorrow. Taylor, thank you so much. Bye
Thank
bye.
you.